start, I wanted to do, a brief introduction on who I am professionally. So my name's Keren Sofer. I am a licensed psychologist. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I have a private practice. And I've been in private practice for, oh gosh, about 15 years now, almost 16 years. And I've also worked in a couple of other settings over the course of my career in terms of outpatient hospital work and nonprofit agency work as well. And, had a range of experiences, in graduate school. At this point, and over the past several years, I would say I can kind of have three sort of buckets of focus that I incorporate into my clinical practice. I do psychotherapy with individuals and couples mostly, and have training in EFT, emotionally focused therapy, in my work with couples. I'm also really influenced by attachment approaches, humanistic and systemic approaches as well, and kind of created my own version of some integrative way of working. The second bucket, I would say, is reproductive health. And so that's something I've been doing for about the past 10 years and working with individuals, couples and families navigating, infertility or family building through third-party reproduction, and doing evaluation and therapy, counseling in that realm. And then the third bucket is immigration work. And so I've been involved in working with immigrants and immigrant families around assessment and evaluation that can be used and used to support and inform various forms of immigration relief and some of the different ways that people get documentation and work through issues around their status or their asylum claims. So those are the three buckets. And as you might notice, I feel fairly sturdy in my professional identity. I'm putting myself out there in the last couple of years, offering, developing supervision groups and CE programs, sharing my knowledge and insights around shame, working with shame. But I didn't always feel so sturdy. And I really credit, my deep dive into shame theory and really learning and trying to learn and continuing to learn how to work effectively with shame as a really important professional lifeline for me. So going back into, pre-training, pre-graduate school training, I've always had a mix, like most of you, of confidence and insecurity in this work. And when I decided to pursue graduate school in clinical psychology, it brought both of those things on it as well, right? Of course, graduate school learning inherently can be a shame-inducing experience because you have to admit what you don't know and what you're not good at yet. But I got through, and throughout my internship, as a psychologist, I had to do a clinical internship in order to, on my path to graduation and then ultimately licensure. And I was feeling more confident. And I, really felt like, oh, I can do this. I can take on this role professionally. And as I had to do, back in 2010 when postdocs were required for psychology to get licensed as a psychologist in Pennsylvania. I went on to a postdoc doctoral position and, working my way through. And this brings us to, a moment in time which really shifted things for me. And I remember the day. I remember the weather. It was February. It was kind of gloomy like it is today. I'm sitting in my office at my postdoc in an outpatient clinic that I'm working in and finishing some notes up. And one of the faculty supervisors walks in and asks if he could speak with me. And honestly, I would tell you what happened next, but I don't really remember because he said something to me like, Keren, you're not holding on to clients. And also something like, I don't really know if you're going to make it in private practice. And I was emotionally underwater. I was feeling that burn behind my eyes. I collapsed internally. It was completely devastating. I felt pathetic. I felt alone. And I can even feel, traces of it right now just talking about it. And that was in 2010. That was back in 2010. So fast forward to 2019. And I'm walking up Broad Street in Philadelphia. I think most of you who signed up for this, kind of know me from the Philly network, mental health network here. And I'm listening to a podcast, as I often do. I'm walking up. And this particular day, I'm listening to a podcast called Therapist Uncensored. A very good podcast, if I do say so. I highly recommend it. And the hosts were interviewing a psychologist and researcher named Stephen Finn. And Stephen Finn was familiar to me because he developed an approach to psychological assessment called therapeutic assessment, which I now understand is a very humane, counter-shaming approach to assessment. And in graduate school, a group of peers and I, along with a professor who had studied under him, brought him to campus to do a training with us at the time. And so I'm eagerly listening to this podcast. Steve Finn, someone who I really look up to. And the episode is on the topic of shame. He's talking about shame. And the funny thing was, I had heard this episode before. I had listened to it 2 years before that, in 2017. It was a recast of the podcast. But this time, something hit me really differently as I was listening to it. I became completely sucked in. He defined shame. He said it's likely the most terrible feeling, the experience, feeling just awful about yourself, becoming cut off from the world around you, is something he said. And I had this moment where I realized something about myself. I realized I had been carrying professional shame for my entire career. This is 9 years of this. And that recognition hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized, okay, so all these years, I'm obsessively logging my client attendance rates. I'm calculating my rate of turning consults into clients. I'm counting up, how many people are abandoning therapy with me. And all of a sudden, something cleared in me, and I, began to make sense. My paralysis, when someone would decide to drop down to biweekly or once a month, and then my failure to explore it with them, I had been gripped with shame, frozen in it, and the shame of being inadequate, the shame that, oh, this supervisor was right all along. And, the funny thing about all of this, though, is that you really would not have guessed it. I think I've known some of you for a while before 2019, and you might have had no idea because I was really, really good at hiding this. I at times would toy with the idea, well, maybe I should open a coffee shop or a ceramic studio, maybe I'm not cut out for this. I don't know if I can handle this. And I kept listening as I kept listening to the podcast, and Steve Finn's talking about the evolutionary purpose of shame, this idea that it gives our caregivers this efficient way to teach us about danger and inhibit us, but also the long-term impacts of those shame moments, that aren't repaired. So he described these examples of unmanaged and unrepaired shame incidents and experiences that they can stay with us, well into adulthood. And he also shared, that repaired shame leads to brain growth in us as children, which is fascinating to me, right? This experience-dependent development Alan Shore talks about. That, in fact, part of our brain that's implicated in emotional regulation and our capacity to experience guilt is the part that grows when we have healthy repair, and develops into what he calls healthy shame. Others call it that too. Is equivalent to guilt, the experience of guilt. So, after hearing this podcast, the second time, I was really reawakened. I began to Google shame. I was reading blogs. I was looking for training. I was on Google Scholar, doing searches, writings about shame. I was talking about it with anyone who even seemed, mildly interested. And the more I learned, the more I realized, how complex it is, how ubiquitous it is, and how necessary it is, especially, of course, when it's managed well. And I also realized, oh, wow, I went from maybe state shame, where I felt shame in the moment, to trait shame, to the shame becoming really intertwined with my professional identity, and that part of who I am. So, in fact, as I was walking down Broad Street, I didn't know it at the time, but just a few blocks away, Jefferson Hospital is where Donald Nathanson, who is a psychiatrist there, who wrote and studied extensively about shame, where, his headquarters were. And he developed a concept called the compass of shame that also was very influential for me to discover in my seeking out and taking in everything I could about shame. The concept is really used to describe common ways that we all cope and manage with the deep pain of shame. Shame is awful. It's very unpleasant, and we all have to find ways to manage it, or we literally wouldn't be able to just get out the door in the morning. And I realized in learning about his compass, and there's 4 poles on there: attack other, attack self, avoid, and withdraw. And my preferred pole that I do, I self-doubt, questioning, comparing myself to my peers relentlessly, is attack self. And I realized it took a lot out of me. But something else really clicked for me that day, and I realized that instead of this fruitless search for the source of my inadequacy, perhaps I needed to shift my viewfinder, understand that the origins of my professional shame, where they were coming from, and then how to manage it. And it also, helped me, realize that supervisor was bringing his shame to me. And he was transferring his own shame through the attack other pole. He was really communicating to me, what I learned later was pressure from hospital administrators for that clinic to make more money, and, his possible mismanagement of that. I don't know, but he brought it to me, and my awareness of, people in authority have a huge responsibility around how they manage their own shame. And when they're not managing it, they can do a lot of destructive damage. And we know as clinicians, the shame that comes up in the supervisory relationship, which is so central to our field and so important in learning how to do clinical work, that as those of you who are supervisors, myself included, just the heavy responsibility we carry to manage our own shame going into that role. So over these years, I've developed my own shame-informed lens with three components to it that integrates a lot from shame theory. So the first is based on the evidence that shame protects our connections. We need, as humans who are interdependent, a signaling system to tell us we've crossed a boundary or we have been violated. It helps us recognize, for example, when the relationship needs our attention and care, when the relationship is not good for us. Well, maybe we have to cut off a relationship, for example. For me, just realizing that boundary of mine had been violated by this supervisor who was wielding his power over me in order to manage his own shame, that was really transformative for me. It helped me not take it in and to, even imaginally give that back to him. The second component is that the core of every rupture or conflict that matters, from my perspective, is shame. That, I know that's a bold statement, but if we follow the trail that shame leaves behind, the little, like breadcrumbs, we usually can figure out, where things go wrong interpersonally. And then for me, that's really helped illuminate what gets off track with clients when things feel disconnected, or even just personally disconnected with others. And it's given me a map to ask myself, I'm feeling so aggravated by this person's behavior. What shame is being triggered in me? And if I can figure that out, perhaps build a bridge to understanding what's driving their behavior as well. So often, if I'm feeling shame, the other person is detecting it implicitly or explicitly, and vice versa, right? So it goes in both directions. And then finally, the third component that I'll mention today is that well-managed shame doesn't mean we rid ourselves of it, but instead we learn from it. Shame is a great teacher. So it really reveals to us what matters most to us, what our values are, what aspects of our identity we're proud of or insecure about, how we want to be seen by others, how we want to see ourselves. These days, there's a lot of pop psychology. It's talking about, shifting the shame thought. Don't think you're bad, just think that you did something wrong. It's not that easy. We know that, right? We know as mental health clinicians, like we know you can't just change your thought and feel differently. It doesn't complete the circle. We have to, really lean into the shame, be able to tolerate our own shame in order to work with it effectively in ourselves and then with others. So that's why I've been on this journey these past few years. I really want to share out these concepts and my own unique spin on them to spread the word about shame. The other thing I'll just mention really quickly about shame too is it's trans-theoretical. It doesn't matter if you're a CBT therapist or ACT or you do psychoanalytic work. It doesn't actually matter. Also, what population you happen to be working with or what kinds of presenting issues you specialize in. I work with a broad range, immigration work, reproductive health, couples. Shame is there with all of it. And it's activated in me in different ways, depending on, what's happening in the interpersonal realm. So I think that, with this work, I've realized I'm not, here telling people, hey, you should do it this way, not this way. Not at all. In fact, I'm saying, hey, what are you already doing that's shame informed? It's just that you might not be calling it that. And what's the power behind recognizing and knowing and understanding, oh, I'm doing it this way, I'm validating in this way, and it's effective. And now I know that another reason that that's effective is because I'm addressing underlying shame. And then being able to name it to yourself gives you this extra tool and energy behind those interventions that you already are using, and be able to use them with more intention, which I think adds to the power. So in kind of closing this up, right now we're living in a time that is saturated with shame, shaming and shamelessness. And as clinicians, we have to be able to navigate it. And I believe that we as therapists really do play a crucial role in the world right now. I think we're essential. We can become, those shame navigators so that we don't, get traumatized by just bearing witness to the shame unbound and spiraling, and that we have ways to intervene, whether at the one-on-one level with our clients, or at broader levels in terms of other work that we're all involved in. So those are my thoughts and a little bit about my own journey here in learning about and working with shame. Next month, in honor of Tax Day on April 15th, I'm going to do another Shame Bite April 3rd, a Friday, and I'll be talking about money and fee setting and shame, because that's all intertwined too. And I just want to thank everyone who showed up today. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording, and if anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions after the recording is stopped, you are welcome to do so. I have a few more minutes here.